At exactly 4:12 a.m., Luke Holloway was 54 miles from the Guatemalan border, driving a refrigerated semi packed with $63 million in cartel money. He just pulled off one of the most sophisticated inside jobs in narco history. But then his burner phone vibrated. One message, one photo. His kids, restrained and terrified in a dimly lit basement. And the text, "You've got 72 hours, bring the money back, or this is their last day on earth." That was the moment Luke Holloway stopped being a runaway and started hunting every last man who touched his blood. Before I walk you through the full story, I just have a small favor to ask. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. Now let's get back to the story. 3 months earlier, Luke Holloway had been living a double life that was slowly destroying everything he cared about. By day, he was sheriff of Laredo County, Texas, a respected law enforcement officer with 23 years of service and a reputation for integrity that had earned him 3 consecutive elections. By night, he was a paid informant for the Hermanos del Golfo cartel, providing intelligence that helped them stay ahead of federal investigations. Luke's corruption had begun 3 years earlier, when cartel representatives approached him with an offer that seemed impossible to refuse. They knew about his gambling debts, his daughter's expensive medical treatments for leukemia, and his wife's struggling art gallery that was hemorrhaging money every month. The cartel offered to solve all of his financial problems in exchange for simple cooperation. The arrangement started small. Luke would receive $40,000 per month for providing advance warning about DEA raids and Border Patrol operations. Luke told himself that he was only passing along information about investigations that rarely resulted in significant arrests anyway. Luke convinced himself that his cooperation wasn't really helping criminals, but was just providing them with information they could probably obtain through other sources. Luke's role gradually expanded as the cartel came to trust his reliability and discretion. Luke began altering evidence logs, losing crucial documents, and providing false testimony that protected cartel operations from serious law enforcement pressure. Luke had become an essential component of the cartel's security infrastructure. Luke's corruption was methodical and sophisticated. He had developed procedures for accessing and modifying official records without leaving traces that could be detected during routine audits. Luke used his administrative authority to create false documentation and to ensure that investigations were misdirected away from significant cartel activities. Luke's monthly payments had grown to nearly $60,000 as his value to the organization increased. Luke was providing intelligence about federal investigations, Border Patrol staffing levels, and coordination between different law enforcement agencies. Luke had access to information that was crucial for protecting cartel operations throughout South Texas. But Luke's carefully constructed double life began to unravel when his wife, Jenna, discovered evidence of his criminal activities during a routine review of their financial records. Jenna found unexplained deposits, cash payments, and communications with people she knew were connected to criminal organizations in Mexico. Jenna's confrontation with Luke was devastating and final. She told Luke that she had suspected his involvement with criminals for months, but had hoped that she was wrong about the man she had married and trusted for 15 years. Jenna explained that she could not continue living with someone who was betraying everything he had sworn to protect. Jenna gave Luke an ultimatum: end his relationship with the cartel immediately and cooperate with federal authorities to expose their operations, or she would take their children and disappear permanently. Jenna told Luke that she would not allow 13-year-old Lila and 9-year-old Cole to grow up believing that their father was a hero when he was actually a criminal. Luke's attempt to negotiate with Jenna failed completely. Luke tried to explain that his cooperation with the cartel had been motivated by his desire to provide for his family and to ensure that Lila received the medical treatment she needed to survive her cancer. Luke argued that his corruption had actually protected his family from financial ruin. Jenna rejected Luke's explanations and told him that she had already consulted with attorneys about divorce proceedings and custody arrangements. Jenna had also contacted federal authorities about the possibility of entering witness protection if Luke's criminal associates posed a threat to her or the children. Jenna's final decision was to take Lila and Cole to Canada, where she had relatives who could provide temporary shelter while she established a new life away from Luke and his criminal associations. Jenna told Luke that she would not allow their children to be used as leverage against him by people who had no moral constraints on their use of violence. Luke watched helplessly as Jenna loaded their children into a car and drove away from the only home they had ever known. Luke realized that his corruption had cost him everything that mattered to him while providing him with money that was now worthless without his family to spend it on. Luke's isolation and desperation led him to consider options that he had never contemplated during his years as a law enforcement officer. Luke understood that the cartel would eventually eliminate him as a security risk once they no longer needed his services. Luke also realized that federal authorities would probably discover his corruption and arrest him for crimes that would result in decades in prison. Luke's analysis of his situation convinced him that his only realistic option was to steal enough money from the cartel to disappear permanently while providing him with resources necessary to start a new life in a location where he could eventually reunite with his family. Luke began planning what would become one of the largest cash thefts in criminal history. Luke Holloway's position as Sheriff of Laredo County had given him unprecedented access to information about cartel operations, law enforcement procedures, and security measures that would be crucial for planning and executing a massive theft. Luke's 3 years of cooperation with the Hermanos del Golfo cartel had provided him with detailed knowledge about their money laundering networks and cash storage facilities. Luke knew that the cartel moved enormous quantities of cash through legitimate shipping operations that used refrigerated trucks to transport money disguised as agricultural products. Luke had helped protect these operations by providing advance warning about inspection schedules and ensuring that certain vehicles received minimal scrutiny from Border Patrol agents. Luke's intelligence about cartel operations revealed that they typically stored between $50 and $80 million at their primary cash processing facility near Nuevo Laredo. This facility served as a temporary storage location where money from drug sales throughout the United States was consolidated before being transferred to Mexican banking networks that would launder the funds through legitimate business operations. Luke had visited this facility several times during his coordination meetings with cartel leadership, giving him detailed knowledge about the building's layout, security systems, and operational procedures. Luke knew about the refrigerated storage areas where cash was kept, the guard rotations that protected the facility, and the transportation schedules that moved money to its final destinations. Luke's plan focused on intercepting a major cash shipment during the transportation phase when the money would be most vulnerable to theft. Luke identified a specific route that cartel trucks used to transport money from the storage facility to distribution points throughout Mexico, and he calculated that he could intercept such a shipment without being detected if he had sufficient advance warning about the timing. Luke's access to law enforcement communications allowed him to monitor federal investigations and to ensure that his theft would not coincide with any official operations that might complicate his escape. Luke could track DEA surveillance activities, Border Patrol deployment patterns, and interagency coordination efforts that might interfere with his plans. Luke's most valuable asset was his relationship with Miguel Santos, the cartel's transportation coordinator, who was responsible for scheduling and routing cash shipments. Miguel trusted Luke completely and regularly shared information about upcoming operations because he believed that Luke's law enforcement position made him an ideal source of security intelligence. Luke used his relationship with Miguel to gather specific information about the largest cash shipment that the cartel planned to move during the coming month. Luke learned that this shipment would contain approximately $63 million in cash, gold, and cryptocurrency storage devices that represented the accumulated proceeds from drug sales throughout Texas and the southwestern United States. Luke's plan required him to create a plausible explanation for his presence along the transportation route at the exact time when the cash shipment would be vulnerable to interception. Luke's solution was to arrange a fake law enforcement operation that would provide cover for his criminal activities while ensuring that no legitimate officers would interfere with his theft. Luke used his administrative authority to create false documentation about a joint operation between local and federal agencies that would require him to conduct surveillance along specific highway routes. Luke's false operation was sophisticated enough to pass casual scrutiny while providing him with official justification for being in the right place at the right time. Luke also needed to neutralize the security team that would be protecting the cash shipment without causing unnecessary violence that might trigger intensive investigation by law enforcement agencies. Luke's solution was to recruit the guards themselves by offering them more money than they were earning from the cartel in exchange for their cooperation in his theft. Luke's recruitment of the security team was facilitated by his knowledge of their personal financial situations and their growing dissatisfaction with working conditions within the cartel organization. Luke offered each guard enough money to relocate permanently to locations where they would be safe from cartel retaliation while providing them with resources to start legitimate businesses. Luke's planning also included detailed procedures for moving and concealing $63 million in stolen assets, while avoiding detection by both law enforcement and cartel investigators. Luke had studied money laundering techniques and international banking regulations to develop methods for converting stolen cash into forms that could be used without triggering official reporting requirements. Luke's escape plan included multiple contingency options that would allow him to reach safety even if some aspects of his theft operation were discovered or compromised. Luke had prepared false identification documents, established secure communication channels, and identified transportation resources that would allow him to disappear completely if his criminal activities were exposed. The theft of $63 million began at exactly 11:47 p.m. on a moonless Tuesday night when Luke Holloway activated the fake law enforcement operation that would provide cover for the most audacious crime of his career. Luke's official radio communications indicated that he was conducting surveillance related to a joint federal investigation, giving him legitimate justification for being alone on a remote highway 40 miles south of Laredo. Luke had positioned himself at a predetermined location where Miguel Santos had told him the cash shipment would pass during its journey from the storage facility to distribution points in central Mexico. Luke's timing was perfect because the refrigerated truck carrying $63 million arrived exactly when Miguel had predicted it would. Luke activated his emergency lights and pulled the truck over, using his authority as a county sheriff. The driver and security guards recognized Luke immediately because they had worked with him during previous operations, and they had no reason to suspect that this traffic stop was anything other than a routine security check. Luke explained that he had received intelligence about federal agents conducting surveillance along this route, and that he needed to inspect the truck to ensure that it contained only legitimate cargo. Luke's explanation was entirely plausible because the guards knew that he regularly provided advance warning about law enforcement activities that might threaten cartel operations. Luke's inspection of the truck revealed exactly what he had expected based on Miguel's information. The refrigerated trailer contained dozens of sealed containers that appeared to hold frozen meat products, but actually contained cash, gold bars, and electronic storage devices holding cryptocurrency assets worth tens of millions of dollars. Luke told the guards that he needed to examine the cargo more thoroughly at a secure location where they would not be observed by federal surveillance teams that might be monitoring the highway. Luke directed the driver to follow him to an abandoned truck stop facility that Luke had prepared for the final phase of his operation. At the truck stop, Luke implemented the plan that he had spent months developing with the cooperation of the security team that was supposed to be protecting the cartel's assets. The guards helped Luke transfer the genuine cargo to his own refrigerated truck while loading the original vehicle with containers filled with sand and concrete blocks that would maintain the correct weight distribution. The cargo transfer operation took exactly 43 minutes to complete. Luke's preparation had been so thorough that every container was replaced with a decoy that would pass casual inspection while concealing the fact that millions of dollars in cartel money had been stolen. Luke had even prepared replacement seals and shipping labels that would make the decoy cargo appear authentic. Luke's stolen cargo included approximately $38 million in cash bundled for international transport, $12 million worth of gold bars marked with cartel symbols, and electronic storage devices containing cryptocurrency assets worth another $13 million. Luke had successfully intercepted one of the largest single shipments of criminal proceeds in the history of organized crime. The guards who had assisted Luke were paid their promised compensation and given detailed instructions for reaching safe havens where they could disappear permanently. Luke had researched witness protection procedures and international refuge options to ensure that the guards could survive cartel retaliation if their cooperation was discovered. Luke's original plan called for him to drive the stolen money to a private airfield, where he had arranged for transportation to a country that did not have extradition treaties with the United States. Luke had prepared false identification documents and had established financial accounts that would allow him to access his stolen assets from anywhere in the world. Luke was driving toward the Guatemalan border when his burner phone received the message that would transform his brilliant theft into a desperate rescue mission. The photograph of his children, bound and terrorized in a basement location, made Luke realize that the cartel had anticipated his betrayal and had taken measures to ensure his cooperation, even after he had stopped working for them. Luke's immediate reaction was rage, followed by the cold calculation that had made him successful during 23 years in law enforcement. Luke understood that the cartel had probably been monitoring his family since Jenna's departure, and had been prepared to use his children as leverage if Luke ever attempted to betray the organization. Luke also realized that the cartel's ultimatum was probably not sincere and that they would likely kill his children regardless of whether he returned the stolen money. Luke's law enforcement experience had taught him that criminal organizations typically eliminated security risks even when their demands were met, and Luke understood that he and his family now represented unacceptable threats to cartel operations. Luke's decision to abandon his escape plan and return to search for his children was motivated by his understanding that compliance with the cartel's demands would probably not save his family's lives. Luke realized that his only realistic option was to use his stolen resources to fund a private war against the people who had taken his children. The abduction of Lila and Cole Holloway had been planned with the same professional precision that characterized all of the Hermanos del Golfo cartel's operations. The organization had been monitoring Jenna Holloway and her children since they had arrived in Canada 3 months earlier, waiting for the optimal moment to acquire leverage that could be used against Luke if he ever attempted to betray his criminal employers. The cartel's surveillance of the Holloway family had revealed their daily routines, security arrangements, and the specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited during a kidnapping operation. The cartel knew that Jenna had hired a private security consultant to protect her children, but they also knew that this protection was minimal and could be easily overcome by professional criminals. The kidnapping took place on a Tuesday afternoon when Lila and Cole were visiting Riverfront Park in Ottawa with their security escort, David Chen. David was a retired police officer who had been hired through a legitimate security company and had no idea that his clients were being stalked by international criminals who were planning to use them as hostages. The cartel's kidnapping team consisted of 4 men who had extensive experience with abduction operations and who understood how to acquire targets without triggering intensive law enforcement responses. The team had studied the park's layout, identified escape routes, and prepared equipment that would allow them to complete their mission quickly and efficiently. The abduction began when 2 team members approached David Chen from different directions while he was supervising the children near the park's playground area. The attackers used non-lethal weapons to incapacitate David without causing injuries that would require immediate medical attention or generate excessive law enforcement interest in the incident. Lila and Cole were taken during the brief window when David was unconscious and unable to protect them. The children were moved to a van that was waiting in the park's parking area and were transported to a secure location where they could be held until Luke complied with the cartel's demands or until they were no longer useful as leverage. The kidnapping was designed to appear like a random crime rather than a targeted operation against specific individuals. The cartel wanted local police to treat the disappearance as a conventional missing persons case rather than as an international incident that might attract federal attention or cooperation between American and Canadian law enforcement agencies. David Chen's injuries were consistent with a mugging or random assault, and his initial statements to police indicated that he had been attacked by unknown criminals who might have been motivated by robbery rather than kidnapping. David had no memory of the actual abduction and could provide no useful information about the perpetrators or their methods. Jenna's initial reaction to her children's disappearance was to assume that Luke's criminal associates had taken them to pressure him into continued cooperation or to punish him for any attempt to withdraw from their operations. Jenna immediately contacted both Canadian and American law enforcement agencies to report her suspicions about the kidnapping's true purpose. But Jenna's attempts to interest law enforcement in investigating the cartel connection were unsuccessful because she had no concrete evidence linking the disappearance to organized crime activities. Canadian police treated the case as a conventional kidnapping and focused their investigation on local criminals who might have targeted wealthy American families for ransom purposes. The cartel's communication with Luke was designed to provide unmistakable proof that they had taken his children while avoiding any statements that could be used as evidence in legal proceedings. The photograph that Luke received showed his children in a basement location that could not be identified, and the accompanying message contained no specific threats that would constitute actionable criminal violations. Luke's law enforcement training allowed him to analyze the photograph for clues about his children's location and condition. Luke could see that Lila and Cole appeared to be uninjured, but were obviously terrified and had probably been given minimal food and water during their captivity. Luke also noted details about the basement's construction that might help identify the building where they were being held. Luke's immediate response was to attempt negotiations with the cartel through the communication channels that he had used during his 3 years of cooperation. Luke tried to reach Miguel Santos and other cartel representatives to discuss terms for his children's release, but none of his usual contacts responded to his messages. Luke realized that the cartel had probably decided to eliminate him as a security risk, regardless of whether he returned the stolen money. Luke's knowledge of their operations and his law enforcement connections made him too dangerous to be allowed to survive, and the kidnapping of his children was probably designed to ensure his cooperation during the final phase of their plan to kill him. Luke's decision to abandon his escape plan and search for his children was based on his understanding that compliance with the cartel's demands would not guarantee their safety. Luke knew that criminal organizations typically eliminated witnesses even when their demands were met, and Luke realized that his family's only chance for survival was for him to locate and rescue them before the cartel's deadline expired. Luke Holloway's transformation from corrupt sheriff to avenging father began when he abandoned his refrigerated truck containing $63 million in stolen cartel money at a remote location near the Guatemala-Mexico border. Luke realized that money was worthless if his children were dead, and he committed himself to using every resource at his disposal to find Lila and Cole before the cartel's 72-hour deadline expired. Luke's first priority was gathering intelligence about the cartel's operations in Mexico and identifying locations where they might be holding American hostages. Luke's law enforcement background had taught him about investigative techniques and intelligence-gathering methods that would be crucial for tracking down his children in a foreign country controlled by criminal organizations. Luke used his knowledge of cartel operations to identify likely locations where high-value hostages would be held during kidnapping operations. Luke knew that the cartel maintained secure facilities throughout northern Mexico that were used for interrogations, negotiations, and eliminations when their criminal activities required extreme measures against security threats. Luke's investigation began with Jose Martinez, a mid-level cartel operative who managed security operations at ranches and warehouses throughout the border region. Luke had worked with Jose during his years of cooperation and knew that Jose had access to information about special operations that required maximum security and discretion. Luke's approach to Jose was direct and violent. Luke used his law enforcement training and equipment to overcome Jose's security measures and to extract information about current cartel operations that might involve American hostages. Luke's interrogation techniques were brutal but effective, providing him with specific intelligence about facilities where his children might be held. Jose's information led Luke to a ranch complex near Nuevo Laredo, where the cartel conducted sensitive operations that required isolation from official scrutiny. Jose told Luke that this facility was currently being used for a special project involving American targets, but Jose claimed that he did not know specific details about the hostages or their eventual fate. Luke's assault on the ranch facility was planned and executed with the precision of a military operation. Luke used his knowledge of cartel security procedures to identify vulnerabilities in their defensive arrangements and to develop attack strategies that would allow him to penetrate their perimeter without triggering alarms that might result in his children being eliminated. Luke's attack on the ranch began before dawn, when most of the guards would be tired and less alert. Luke used suppressed weapons and night vision equipment to eliminate perimeter security without attracting attention from personnel inside the main buildings. Luke's military-style tactics allowed him to neutralize 6 guards without triggering any response from the facility's command structure. Luke's search of the ranch buildings revealed extensive evidence of criminal activities including weapon storage, drug processing equipment, and communication systems that connected the facility to cartel operations throughout Mexico and the United States. But Luke found no trace of his children or any indication that American hostages had been held at this location. Luke's interrogation of surviving ranch personnel provided information about other facilities where high-value hostages might be held during special operations. Luke learned about a warehouse complex in Monterrey that was used for operations requiring maximum security, and that was managed by cartel specialists who handled sensitive negotiations and eliminations. Luke's intelligence gathering also revealed the identity of Carlos Mendez, a former ICE agent who had been corrupted by the cartel and was now providing them with expertise about American law enforcement procedures and hostage management techniques. Carlos had been involved in planning the kidnapping operation and would have knowledge about where Luke's children were being held. Luke's hunt for Carlos required him to use his law enforcement contacts to track down someone who was actively avoiding detection by both criminal organizations and federal agencies. Luke discovered that Carlos was living under a false identity in San Antonio and was working as a security consultant while maintaining his secret relationship with the cartel. Luke's confrontation with Carlos took place at Carlos's apartment in San Antonio, where Luke used enhanced interrogation techniques to extract information about the kidnapping operation and his children's current location. Carlos initially claimed ignorance about the operation, but Luke's persuasive methods eventually convinced him to provide detailed information about the cartel's plans. Carlos revealed that Lila and Cole were being held at a secure facility in Monterrey that was used exclusively for high-value hostages who might be needed for extended negotiations or psychological pressure operations. Carlos also told Luke that the cartel had no intention of releasing the children alive, regardless of whether Luke returned the stolen money. Carlos's information confirmed Luke's suspicions that the cartel's ultimatum was designed to lure him into a trap where he could be eliminated along with his children. Carlos explained that the cartel viewed Luke's family as security risks who possessed too much knowledge about their operations to be allowed to survive. Luke's final interrogation of Carlos provided him with detailed information about the Monterrey facility, including its location, security arrangements, and the number of guards who would be protecting his children. Carlos also provided Luke with intelligence about the facility's layout in the specific room where American hostages were typically held during extended operations. Luke Holloway's assault on the cartel facility in Monterrey was planned as a precision operation that would maximize his chances of rescuing his children while minimizing the risk that they would be harmed during the fighting. Luke's law enforcement and military training had taught him about hostage rescue techniques and urban warfare tactics that would be crucial for penetrating a heavily defended facility. Luke's reconnaissance of the warehouse complex revealed that it was protected by sophisticated security measures, including electronic surveillance, armed guards, and communication systems that could summon reinforcements from other cartel facilities throughout the region. Luke realized that he would have only minutes to complete his mission before overwhelming enemy forces arrived. Luke's attack plan focused on creating multiple diversions that would confuse the facility's defenders while allowing him to approach the building where his children were being held. Luke used improvised explosive devices and arson attacks to create chaos that would draw guards away from critical areas while providing cover for his infiltration of the main facility. Luke's entry into the warehouse complex was accomplished through a service entrance that had been identified during his reconnaissance activities. Luke used his knowledge of commercial building layouts to navigate through the facility without being detected by guards who were responding to the diversionary attacks he had created. Luke's search for his children required him to systematically clear multiple rooms while avoiding detection by guards who were patrolling the facility in response to the ongoing emergency. Luke used suppressed weapons and non-lethal techniques whenever possible to avoid creating noise that might alert other defenders to his presence. Luke's discovery of Lila and Cole in a basement storage room was both relief and horror. His children were alive but showed clear signs of psychological trauma from their captivity. Luke could see that they had been provided with minimal food and water and had been kept in conditions that were designed to break their spirits and make them compliant. Luke's reunion with his children was brief because he understood that cartel reinforcements would arrive within minutes and that their only chance for survival was immediate evacuation from the facility. Luke had prepared emergency supplies and transportation that would allow them to reach safety before the cartel could organize an effective pursuit. Luke's extraction from the warehouse complex required him to fight his way through guards who were attempting to prevent his escape. Luke's combat experience allowed him to overcome multiple defenders while protecting his children from the violence that surrounded their rescue operation. Luke's escape vehicle was a modified pickup truck that he had prepared with armor plating and emergency medical supplies that might be needed if his children had been injured during their captivity. Luke's driving skills and knowledge of Monterrey's street layout allowed him to evade pursuit vehicles while reaching a safe house that he had prepared for emergency situations. Luke's safe house was a small apartment where he could provide his children with immediate medical attention while planning their evacuation from Mexico. Luke had prepared this location with supplies that would allow them to survive for several days while he arranged transportation that would take them beyond the reach of cartel retaliation. Luke's examination of his children revealed that they had been physically unharmed during their captivity, but had suffered severe psychological trauma that would require professional treatment. Lila and Cole were initially unable to speak coherently about their experiences and showed clear signs of the terror they had endured during their imprisonment. Luke's priority was providing his children with immediate psychological support while planning their escape from Mexico to a location where they could receive proper medical care and protection from further cartel attacks. Luke understood that his family would never be safe as long as the Hermanos del Golfo cartel continued to operate. Luke's communication with his children during their first hours of freedom was limited because they were still processing the trauma of their kidnapping and rescue. Luke focused on providing them with reassurance about their safety while avoiding detailed discussions about the violence that had been necessary to secure their freedom. Luke's preparation for leaving Mexico included acquiring false identification documents that would allow his family to cross international borders without being detected by law enforcement agencies or cartel operatives who might be monitoring official immigration checkpoints. Luke Holloway's evacuation of his children from Mexico required the same careful planning and execution that had characterized his theft of $63 million in his rescue operation in Monterrey. Luke understood that the cartel would spare no expense to track down his family, and that conventional escape routes would be monitored by criminal organizations with extensive intelligence networks. Luke's escape plan utilized a private aviation network that specialized in providing transportation for wealthy clients who valued discretion and were willing to pay premium prices for services that avoided official scrutiny. Luke had researched these services during his planning for the original theft and had established contacts who could provide immediate assistance in emergency situations. Luke's contact in the private aviation network was Maria Santos, a flight coordinator who operated from a small airfield near Guatemala City and who had built her business by asking no questions about her clients' backgrounds or destinations. Maria's services included false flight plans, modified aircraft identifications, and coordination with ground personnel who understood the importance of discretion. Luke's arrangement with Maria included transportation for 3 passengers from Guatemala to the Philippines, with stops for refueling and documentation changes that would make it impossible for anyone to track their complete journey. Luke had chosen the Philippines as their destination because the country had limited extradition agreements and maintained banking privacy laws that would protect their financial assets. Luke's journey to Guatemala City required him to transport his traumatized children across dangerous territory while avoiding detection by cartel operatives who were certainly searching for them throughout northern Mexico. Luke used his knowledge of smuggling routes and border crossing techniques to reach Guatemala without being discovered by his pursuers. Luke's children began to recover from their initial trauma during the journey to Guatemala, but they remained largely silent about their captivity and showed obvious signs of severe psychological distress. Luke realized that Lila and Cole would require extensive therapy and counseling to help them process their experiences and rebuild their trust in adults and authority figures. Luke's reunion with his children was complicated by their awareness that his criminal activities had been directly responsible for their kidnapping and suffering. Lila and Cole understood that their father's theft of cartel money had made them targets for retaliation, and they struggled to reconcile their love for Luke with their anger about the consequences of his choices. Luke's attempt to explain his actions to his children was painful and largely unsuccessful. Luke tried to help them understand that his theft had been motivated by his desire to provide them with a better life away from the violence and corruption that had consumed his career. But Lila and Cole were too traumatized to appreciate the complexity of his motivations. Luke's arrival in the Philippines marked the beginning of a new phase in their lives as a family in hiding. Luke had prepared financial resources and documentation that would allow them to establish a comfortable lifestyle while remaining invisible to both law enforcement agencies and criminal organizations that might be searching for them. Luke's choice of Cebu as their permanent residence was based on the city's large expatriate community, minimal law enforcement presence, and banking institutions that could provide financial services without extensive background investigations. Luke had researched the location extensively and had determined that it offered the best combination of security and lifestyle opportunities for his family. Luke's establishment of their new life in the Philippines included purchasing a modest home, enrolling his children in international schools, and creating legitimate business operations that would provide cover for their presence in the country. Luke's planning had been so thorough that they could live comfortably on the interest from their stolen assets without ever accessing the principal amounts. Luke's relationship with his children slowly began to improve as they adjusted to their new environment and began to understand that their father had risked everything to rescue them from their captors. Lila and Cole gradually came to appreciate that Luke's criminal activities had been motivated by love rather than greed, even though the consequences had been devastating for their family. Luke's children eventually found ways to process their experiences and to build new relationships with their father based on honest discussions about his choices and their consequences. The family's recovery was slow and difficult, but they eventually established a new foundation of trust that acknowledged both Luke's failures and his ultimate commitment to their safety and happiness. Luke's final conversation with his children about their experiences took place 6 months after their arrival in the Philippines when Lila told him, "You're a monster, Dad, but you're our monster." This acknowledgement represented a turning point in their relationship and marked the beginning of their genuine healing as a family that had survived unimaginable trauma through determination and love. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.